Originally endemic in the east of England, in the river systems in that part of Britain, and more recently further west and south, anglers have been familiar with a particular species of fish in their catches, a species about which they little cared except either to return to rebait to catch the actual quarry, or to consider as a few extra ounces in a match catch. Generally it would be disregarded as a skimmer or a hybrid, and further disrespected by the modern angler, whose benchmark is a carp, as a silverfish or silver in combination with roach, common bream, dace, etc. The mystery fish is quite beautiful in its own right. Initially perhaps tricky to identify, but once accustomed to a few telltale features, actually easy to separate. Freshwater fish textbooks seem to contain as much information on this species as any other, but if you look at angling books, we have not yet found a single volume with any information on the species at all. Catching this particular fish is not difficult. They're not fussy about what they eat, and generally speaking it's more a question of location than anything else. I like to think of them as a polite version of the bronze bream, a fish that will hang back until the other fish have finished feeding and then move in as they move off, unless talking about small individuals, in which case they can be caught in amongst others in a general catch. So whatever the bait or method, such as the lift method with bread, or caster, worm, perhaps even soft pellets might be your bag, then they're all likely to be successful. However, location and timing are probably the most important factors, and it's certainly true that in spring and early summer, May, June time, this particular fish is that bit more likely to accept anglers' baits, and it seems that generally, like tench, they're not necessarily keen to accept anglers' baits all year round. Certainly they can be caught at other times of year, and particularly noticeable is their likelihood to be caught when rivers are in flood or certainly under high murky water conditions. We're particularly lucky in this part of the world in that the Grand Union, the North Oxford and the Coventry canals all contain this particular fish, and so does the Warwickshire Avon. It is perfectly possible that the British record, which currently stands at 3 pounds 4 ounces, could be beaten from time to time by anglers who little realise what they have caught. And indeed, 2 members of a local syndicate that I belong to have had fish of 2 pounds 8 ounces from Canal and the Warwickshire Avon in the past 6 months. So what is this fish? What's the mystery species we're talking about here? Well, it's a silver bream, and here is an example of a half pound, maybe 10 ounce individual in the hand. Here we are indeed using the lift bite method with bread, and as can be seen, it's quite easy to catch these fish. But many methods can work, including rod and line, which might cover a light ledger as well as float fishing, or the pole. And fish from the size of tiny blades to over a pound can be caught on many methods. Targeting bigger fish is not so easy, and certainly in our experience it seems that the bigger fish are usually the last fish to be caught in a session, almost as if they aren't brave enough to take part in a feeding spell until all the other fish have been caught or moved away. And certainly springtime is peak time for those fish. The difficulty, however, when trying to catch those slightly more unusual fish is that there is actually no way of separating those out from the more common species during a session, unless you happen to know that a shoal is present in a certain location before you arrive. And therefore lots of other interesting things can happen along the way, such as is occurring here, where we found during this particular trip that an unexpected species would gate crash the party. This individual seemed to think it was a good idea to get right under the weeds on the near side, and so it had to be held away more central to the canal until control could be gained and it could be headed in the right direction. Eventually, of course, the fish, a fine rudd, was brought under control and drawn towards the waiting net without further anxiety. A fish of just over a pound, and quite an unusual catch from a canal. But of course rudd do love bread, and if present can often be tempted by this particular hook bait. We were of course using the rudd's favourite bait, but what ensued, and this is pretty much in real time, was far from expected. 4 rudd of around a pound plus a 10-ounce fish came in quick succession, although looking now one may be a roach rudd hybrid. This was by far the finest catch of the species either of us had ever seen, and therefore, although perhaps a complete fluke, great to happen to catch on camera. Following the rudd came this bronze bream skimmer, a fish we genuinely can call a skimmer, given that that is a name widely recognised as representing its ability to fall onto its side and slide into the net quite neatly. Apart from exceptional catches like this, there are those big roach to get in the way. This one just a gudgeon under 2 pounds. But this is a silver bream, in all its glistening large-scaled splendour. The large eye perhaps suggestive of a night feeder. Comparatively, the bronze or common bream is really quite different, although younger fish can take on a silvery appearance. Its smaller, more numerous scales and scale counts at an eye set it apart, and often, the bigger and older, the darker they become. Seen in succession like this, the silver bream is so different, but often without both species together, it may not be so clear cut. If you can confirm 3 of the diagnostic features, chances are it's a silver bream. We would immediately look at eye size, fin colour and scale size and colour, then check the scale counts from photographs if necessary. The bigger a silver bream gets though, the greater the ID issue can become, such as in this 2-pound canal fish, a true specimen of the species and, pound for pound, equivalent to a roach of over 2.5 pounds. The salmon pink fins are evident with their grey tips, as are the large silver scales and the large eye. One other little test is that the mouth is very roach-like, and yet the bronze bream can extend its mouth parts into a feeding tube. We very much hope you have or can now find or ID a silver bream on your local patch, a neglected fish probably historically due to its poor eating, but a worthy challenge nonetheless.